All right, so let's get going. I'll keep letting people in as they come in, if I see them. And we're gonna share. What are we doing? Week 9.
Week 9.
Yeah. Okay. Do it as a slideshow. And then hopefully I'll be able to see people as they enter. As I can if I do that for sure. All right, Michael, take it away. This is all Mike.
Okay. I think, do I have control? No, I don't. Okay. So
hold on. I can probably give you control.
It doesn't matter.
Oh no, I can't give you control of PowerPoint because it's on my computer.
No, cannot.
No. So. You just I'll be your slide advancer person.
All right. So I guess before we get into today's content, I guess we can kind of sort of see. I think mostly everybody handed in the last assignment, so Chuck and I are going to get to work on that, get it back, and next week. Yeah, and last week we went in class. I know it was pretty sparsely attended, but we did post up the information from the class and the cumulative assignment that got posted. So obviously we can answer any questions about that today if anybody has any after reading it, or obviously you can drop us a note. And what did we talk about last week, Chuck? What was our content?
I don't remember. All sorts of stuff.
Oh, it was a day in the life, and we went through some of the different roles and stuff like that. So you'll be able to see some of those videos and things that we posted up there. But I think it was a pretty lively session for those of you who were there. We had a great time, right, Carrie? So, but. All right. So today, what we're going to talk about is some of the.
I don't think it was Carrie.
What's that?
I don't think it was Carrie. Could have
been. I don't know. Anyway.
All right.
I'm losing my mind. So anyway, today we're going to talk about the regulatory sort of environment for amusements and attractions as it applies to Ontario. So because that's where we're teaching the course, and that's where Chuck and I work. So, if you are going to do, if you're going to operate an attraction in some other jurisdiction, then this may not completely apply, but I think it gives you a sense of kind of what's going on. So, now, we've sort of talked about, all the staffing considerations and all the sort of operational little bits that, you have to start to think about. And now we're going to get into that sort of, before you even get that far down the road, making sure that you could legally operate in sort of what rules, regulations sort of cross into the amusement industry here in Ontario, and the things that you would have to deal with, perhaps on a daily basis as an operator. So, all right, take us away, Chuck.
All right.
Okay. So we're gonna go to Padlet to start things off. So did you email it out, or do you want to drop it in the chat, Chuck?
I'm gonna drop it in the chat here.
Okay. So before we even sort of get into the content, I guess let's sort of drop into the Padlet and let's try to come up with some ideas of areas in which you would think that an operator of an attraction sort of within the categories that we've described in the class would have to contend with in terms of sort of operating in Ontario. So
yeah.
All right. So did you drop that in the chat?
No, not yet.
Come on.
I'm working at halftime today for some reason. I don't know why. All right, here we go. Let's see if I can do something for everyone in the meeting. There we go. Pressing paste. All right, you can copy that and paste that, and I will share. What am I going to? I'm going to actually move this over. computer and I are having a rough go this morning. There we go. Now I can share screen.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm in the Padlet. I can see it.
Okay.
So
Are we in? Are you seeing it? Should we be writing stuff down? So here's what we're going to do. We want everyone to participate as always. The question is, what are some of the elements of attractions that would require knowledge and compliance with local regulations?
So yeah, so I'll let's drop some things in here. So I'll start one for just for discussion purposes, but let's go with let's see.
That is good typing sounds going on there, Mike.
Thank you. So something like zoning and bylaws, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
All right.
Okay, construction. Are they like layering them on top of each other?
That's all right. I'll fix it as we go. All right, that's only two. There's lots and lots and lots. Let's get those creative juices going there, folks. Oh, and I'm going to repiece that because Robert just joined in. He might not have the link. There we go. That's the same link. So if you're already there, don't worry about it. Public health. That's a good one.
There was another one underneath it too.
Yep. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
That is a good one.
Yeah, yeah. So garbage, so labor laws. Okay.
Yep. All right, we're doing good. Let's keep it up. The last class, just not that we're in competition with the last class that had half as many students as you. This whole thing took me 10 minutes to delete all of their comments from last year. They filled the board. Now, having said that, I didn't stack them so nicely last time. That's a good one. Yep.
Oh, I like that one.
Yeah. Security is good. I'm gonna put the bylaws one over here, and if anyone could think of some, just put a B next to whatever you're doing, and I'll put it under the bylaws because I think that's a good one. Because every municipality has bylaws, so
Oh, I see where you put bylaws. Yeah, I had to scroll over to get to it.
yeah.
All right, I'll put so B/ like police. something like that, Chuck.
That's perfect. I didn't put a B on mine, but I knew I was moving over there. Yeah, noises are. You guys have, yeah, the dine safe.
Mhm.
Yep. I think it was zoning over there, 'cause zoning is a bylaw. Every town is different of what you can use your locations for.
And they won't let you build an amusement park in the middle of a suburban neighborhood.
No, they built the suburban neighborhood around the amusement park.
So you have to be there first.
That's right. All right, they were missing a couple of big ones here. If you're in an indoor building, think about if you're staying in a hotel or even if you're in an apartment building or stuff, they do these kind of drills on you every once in a while. What's that for?
Somebody will come up with that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I like tree cutting. That's new one. All right. Are you guys done? Are we slowing down? I don't see anyone here.
Yeah, I think.
All right. Let's. Oh. Let's add in the. Let's see. Let's add in the fire procedures here. All right.
There's a parking one that's kind of hidden at the bottom of the Padlet.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Oh, look at all that.
Crazy park Padlet putting
I
stuff
know.
all over the place.
Fire procedures. Okay. I think we've done a pretty good job here. What do you think, Mike?
I think so. So let's see. So some of the ones we got here. So signage. Yeah, I think there's going to be some requirements for what maybe what type of signs you need to put up. Some mandatory regulatory signs that are attached to some of these bylaws. It could be even some about the size or type of sign that you can use on the exterior of your building. Those kinds of things. COVID regulations, those are pretty new. And hopefully you don't.
Sorry, with signage, and it's another good point. There's a ton of rules that go along with trying to direct people to your attraction using road signage.
Mm-hmm.
So where you can put them, how you can direct people there too. So that was a good one.
Yeah, I mean, in Ontario, you can't just go and put a sign on the road. You have to, you've seen those ones on the highway, right? That show what the attraction is, and it usually has an A and then the name of the attraction. And those are, you have to apply for those through the Ministry of Transportation. So if you just went out and made your own and put it on the side of the highway, then you would probably find somebody from the Ministry of Transportation at your office holding the sign, asking you not to do that. The COVID regulations, pretty new stuff, right? I mean, we all had to deal with that over the last few years about, especially when there were mandates in place about, masking, or if they were about capacity limits, or you name it, right? Type of stuff that was going on. And everybody had to, crazily go through their operations plans and try to figure out how they could comply with those regulations. So, right now, there aren't many out there, so that's good news, I guess, for operating business. But I guess never say never, right? They won't come back. Taxation. Obviously, those are regulations. You have to pay your taxes. You have to. You have to. Whether they're payroll taxes, whether you have to charge HST and get registered as a business to to operate in Canada and be a registered, business that way, because you have to remit obviously to the federal government, the HST on all your transactions that are qualified. Decorations. Yeah, I guess there's some regulations on that. I mean, where we run into some of that, I will say, is when you talk about decor, is when you talk about the fire code, what type of decor you can have in a building or a themed attraction, right? So, when you think about like the simple, I'm going to build a haunted house, let's say, and put it up, then you have to comply with a lot of rules about what the materials that you're using in there, and their fire retardants and flame spread and those kinds of things. In the past, when those rules didn't exist, and you can, if you want to dig into the morbid, I mean, there's all kinds of incidents where something like that burnt down and there was fatalities and things like that. So there are rules and regulations on that.
And you know what? When we built Mississauga, so both of them were in Peel region, and we didn't have any troubles opening up in Brampton with the props that we have in the mini golf course. If you were watching the video, you would have seen like the gorilla and stuff like that. But in Mississauga, we had to redo them all because they said they hadn't been sprayed properly with the fire retardant. So we actually had to go and redo them. The other thing with decorations is if they are owned by someone. So at Wonderland, they have the Peanuts gang. You can't just build a Snoopy without having it approved by someone up the chain that is part of the Peanuts Corporation, right? Charlie Brown, Snoopy, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, all kinds of intellectual property rights and things like that that apply with it. Construction, there are tons of construction regulations and laws, obviously, and we'll touch a little bit briefly later on about those. But suffice it to say that you need to have licensed and registered trades working on your facility. So in terms of how you design and construct things, labor laws, we talked about those earlier in the class, right? About the Employment Standards Act and those kinds of things. So that certainly does apply in Ontario if you're going to be, hiring and paying staff. Security, there are rules and regulations in Ontario about who can be a security officer and what sort of training they require. All security officers in Ontario need to be licensed, so they have to take a mandatory training course, and there are certain requirements in the act about how they identify themselves and what powers that they have. So you can't just can't hire a bouncer and have them come in and be the security for your attraction. So in some cases, where you're a large operation, you might be able to hire your own in-house security team, and in other cases, because of the way things are, that would make more sense for you to hire a company, right, to be a contractor for you to provide security if you needed it. Other cases, there may be a requirement for security. So if you're serving alcohol, or if you're sort of a nightclub type venue, then there would be rules about how much security you need to have versus the number of patrons that you allow in, and vice versa, that kind of stuff. So public health stuff. So there's a number of public health things, not only just like the COVID stuff, but in terms of food handling and sanitation, and I think in there somewhere we talked about pools, and public health kind of covers all of those things. So depending on what type of operation you're running, you may have to comply with local regulations due to that. So you've all seen the restaurants have those green passed failed certificates on the walls. So if you had a check with Glow Zone, I'm sure that the public health comes in and they inspect your operation and make sure that
they make sure make sure the fridges are at the right temperature, the freezers are at the right temperature. That all of the sanitation and the dishwashing procedures are posted, all the things that they need to see to give you the right mark.
So and those are things you'd have to think about if you're going to serve food at your event, that there are rules that would apply to that, whether it's an indoor and outdoor setting, right? So, the requirements for hand washing sinks and, yeah, sanitation and refrigeration. And, I think, we've run into events where there have been challenges with that, right? Because of the sort of vendors or their experience in this market in terms of doing that. And I would say Ontario and the Toronto area is fairly stringent in terms of how they deal with food handling. So there's quite a bit in terms of mandatory training and certificates and inspections, and everything that goes behind that green card program is quite extensive. So you would need to be able to do that. Alcohol sales, yeah, you need a license to sell alcohol in Ontario. So you need to go through the application process. You need to go to the AGCO, and you have to get permission to do that. And there's quite a lot involved in that. And then that dictates where you can sell it, who you can sell it to. And, in the old days, we'd have to have sort of cordoned off areas where people could only consume their alcohol there. And now it's a little bit loosened up. But, also if, I don't know how many of you guys have ever had to take Smart Serve, but that's required for all people who sell or handle alcohol. So if you're going to be the bartender, let's say, or whatever, then you have to have this certificate, which is, it's a fairly short online course, or you can take it. And but it covers, what are the rules and who you can serve to, and overconsumption and recognizing all of those kinds of things. So and there's age limits, right, on who can sell alcohol. So in Ontario it's 18. So if you had minors working in your facility, they couldn't be the ones pouring the beer or doing those kinds of things, even if they're not consuming it. Accessibility, yeah, all right. The Ontarians with Access with Ontarians with Disabilities Act covers all kinds of things. So you would deal with, and I have to deal with it all the time at work, right? About, door openings, number of washroom stalls, counter heights, ramps and stairs, automatic door systems, you name it. So, if you're running a business that is in a building, then how are you providing access to equal access to people that need that have accessibility challenges, right? So if you have 15 steps up to the front of your business, then how do you comply with that? Or do you need an automatic door opener, and so on and so forth. Okay, and that includes also policies with service animals, right? Licenses, yeah, business licenses, any type of license, amusement devices, operators, those kinds of things. Compensation will fall under the ESA. Height restrictions, roller coaster and building. We'll talk a little bit about that later, how those things get devised. But obviously there are rules and how they get sort of formed and set up. Advertising, there may be some rules and regulations about where and to whom you can advertise to, depending on what your product is.
Yeah, it's tough because you can't advertise to kids, right? So if you're running a place that's designed for kids, you can't actually advertise to them or make it blatant.
Advertise to their parents.
That's right.
So pools and swimming, I think that covers under public health, about the management and operation. I think some of you may have followed in the news the issues with the Thermea spa in Whitby. I believe it's in Whitby, is it not?
It is. Yep.
And there are issues that they've been having with in terms of a break. They had a public health issue there with a staph infections coming, or not staph as in STAFF, but STAPH, which they had issues with that. Emergency evacuation procedures that would go into your fire procedures below, right? And as Chuck mentioned, those are like fire drills and emergency exits, and how many exits do you need, and emergency lighting, and so on and so forth, right? There's
when you're building an attraction, even before you start, your architect needs to understand how many steps it takes from any point in the building to get out of the building.
Mhm.
And in a place like a glow zone where there's barricades and walls, like it's like a maze, it actually lessened the amount of like you had to be closer to the door in order for them to sign off on it, because you still had to walk around the door or around the walls to get to the door.
The emergency and fire rules are they're pretty extensive, and those are ones where, you know, when I deal with them in my sort of everyday work, you know, I engage with a lot of consultants about that. So you know, in terms of, you know, designing that, like we just built a giant restaurant at the park, right? And that during the design work, you know, the architect and what we call a code consultant worked with the architect about, you know, looking at those features, right? About making sure that, you know, and then setting what the intended occupancy of the building and what its use case was, because depending on what you're doing in there changes the rules. So because it's a kitchen and it has a kitchen and all those other appliances and it's a restaurant, then it falls on a different set of rules than, let's say, something that would be, you know, just general, you know, a retail store or a movie theater or something like that. They all have different rules. So it's a very complicated landscape there. So that's something that, unless you have really good knowledge of those regulations, then it's probably not something you want to attempt yourself. So but yeah, if you're, you know, kind of devising an indoor attraction, then those are things that you need to reach out to people to talk about and see whether or not you need to make some accommodations, or maybe your plan won't work because you know, because the regulations don't allow it. So what else do we have here? Zoning, same thing, right? You can't just build wherever you want. Sometimes local jurisdictions may set up, you know, you have to apply for zoning approval, and you'll see those boards, you know, in front of construction sites saying, you know, an amendment has been made, blah, 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 and there's going to be a town meeting, all that kind of stuff, because maybe it's zoned for residential and you want to put in something that's a commercial venture, and that may not happen. So, you know, obviously nobody wants you know, certain types of businesses within certain areas because of noise or because it doesn't fit with the general usage of the land there. So, okay. Yeah, waste and disposal kind of falls into public health. You know, things like parking bylaws, you know, there'd be bylaws about all kinds of stuff, like even about maintaining your grass and stuff. You know, there are bylaws about, you know, you have to actually keep it maintained. And then there are rules in Ontario that, and, you know, I deal with this all the time because I'm part of a US park chain that, you know, they're like, well, why do you struggle so much with weeds at Canada's Wonderland where the other parks don't? Well, it's because in Ontario, we can't use herbicides, which, you know, obviously it would make our lives easier in the landscape department if we could. But, you know, there are obviously reasons for that in terms of, you know, environmental rules and just general pesticide bans and things like that. So, you know, in the past where we could have just sprayed for, you know, weeds and sort of other plant species that we didn't want to grow, now we're limited in what we can use. And so it's a lot more manual process. But, you know, so unless you're a golf course, and then you can do whatever you want. But that's kind of those rules, right? Snow clearing, removal, traffic, all that stuff fits in your bylaws, right? About what the local, you know, regulations say about what you can do, capacity, noise. Yeah, we got a lot in here, right?
Yeah.
You know, like noise was an interesting one because let's say you wanted to run a fireworks show. You know, there's certain rules about what time and what days you can do it. You know, you may not be able to do a fireworks show every day of the year. And, you know, the timing of it, you know, usually in most jurisdictions around here, you have to be wrapped up by 11 o'clock. So.
Which was tough on Ontario Place when they had the amphitheater going, or the Budweiser stage is what it's called now. You have a concert on, and sometimes the band showed up later or whatever. They still got to be done by 11 because there's a ton of residential places in and around it.
Yep.
And you could hear some of the concerts. You could hear all the way down to Humber River.
Oh yeah. Yeah, what do we got here? Sewer usage. Yeah, there are bylaws. There are rules about that. what you can discharge into the sanitary sewers and what you can't. And that would come into your construction and design. For instance, at our water park, when we have our backwash filters, when we backwash filters down, we have to make sure they go to the proper drain, because we're backwashing the filter system, so it has a lot of just bio material and stuff like that that's been trapped in the filter. So you're not going to be able to discharge that to the creek, let's say, or into your landscape pond or something like that. You need to be able to go to proper sanitary main and all that kind of stuff. So, yep. Tree cutting, you may need permits to remove trees. There's a lot of rules about the size of tree that you can remove without a permit. If you're going to remove so many trees, then you have to put some back. I had a project this year where we had to make a concession with the Toronto Region Conservation Authority. We were removing some plantings in a zone, and they requested that we replace them somewhere else. So part of our project was an additional cost to replant a whole bunch of trees somewhere else on our property to make up for the ones that we had to remove to do the project that we were looking for. So yeah, there's rules about that. And fencing, there may be requirements for the type of fencing you can use, or if you have to have fencing, let's say as a security barrier for something that height and density, things like that. So for rides, there are specific rules about how high the fence needs to be, and what they call density is the density of a fence is like the size of the gaps. So if you have a picket, how wide can the pickets be apart from each other, so that you can't have a child, let's say, squeeze through them, or get halfway through them.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we'll get halfway through.
and have to get buttered up to get out the other side.
Yeah.
But yeah, there would be rules about that. So okay, I think it's a pretty good list.
That was a good list.
Okay, let's
All right. What I gotta do here? Give me a
let's
sec.
jump back into our PowerPoint presentation.
All right, from the current slide. You think that would work? There we go. Okay.
Okay. All right. So yeah, some of this we touched on the Padlet, but these are some common regulations that you're going to run into here in Ontario, right? In terms of the attractions industry. And the first one is the Ontario Fire Code and the Ontario Building Code. So as I mentioned before, it's going to set the rules for building occupancy and fire safety. So you're looking at things like, how many people can you have in your building, right? So maybe you're going to have a limit, like glow zone. How many patrons can you have in glow zone at any time, Chuck?
144, and it's not based on the size of the building, it's based on the number of washrooms that we have.
Yeah. So
which is weird, because let me tell you, I was at the Wonderland massive 500 seat restaurant. So to get 144 people, we have to have 3 stalls for women, 3 stalls for men, and an accessible washroom.
Mm-hmm.
You have 500 people, and you needed five stalls plus an accessible.
And the difference is because,
son of a gun,
because it's a restaurant.
Yeah, I guess so.
As I mentioned, there are different rules for different purposes. So when you specify what you're going to be doing in your building, because something like a movie theater, for instance, will have a different ratio because everybody's seated and they're not moving around. And the same would be for a restaurant. So you have to define the purpose of your building based on the fire code of what you're going to be doing. But yeah, it's going to set all those kinds of things, right? How many exits and where do they need to be? Seating plans. So in an auditorium or a stadium, how long can a row of seats be before there's an aisle? All those things are in the fire code. So that, as I said, that's something that you need to have really in-depth knowledge of the fire code to be able to decipher. It's certainly not something that you can just pick up and decide you're going to do. So that's where you engage with a lot of experts and consultants to make sure that you're complying. And it's usually something early on too to talk about, depending on what your attraction design is going to be about. is this going to work for the space that I'm thinking about? If you think that you're going to put 1,000 people into a 10,000 square foot building, then you're going to be out of luck. And if your business plan was built on that, then you're not going to be able to realize that, and you're going to be a short-lived attraction. So, yeah, our local health regulations. So yeah, a lot of it you're going to run into is just the preparation and sale of food and beverages. COVID's kind of added a whole bunch of different layers to it now, but there are regulations about all kinds of holding temperatures and sanitation and all that. So you need to be able to be familiar with those. And the Liquor License Act, which you mentioned before, right? The AGCO, which is the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. They set the rules for the sale of alcohol beverages in Ontario. So if you need, there are certain permits or things that you need to get depending on what you're going to do. You can get sort of a one-time use permit. So if you're doing like a rib fest in a park, then you would get something called a special occasion permit, and you could apply for that, and they set the rules for it. If you're going to be a permanent facility, then you're going to get a different type of license. All of those rules apply for when and how and who you can serve to, and whether it's appropriate in your environment. So, and that's an important one because currently liquor licensing or liquor sales in the attractions industry, especially for things that are, I would say, adult or sort of more broadly attended, those could represent a significant source of revenue for you, because one, there's a fairly high markup on alcohol sales, as you're probably all aware, and generally that sort of it adds to your bottom line. So most people want it, they just don't know how to, or they need to be able to know how to get it done legally so you don't get shut down. Okay, what else do we have? The Employment Standards Act, again, something we talked about, right? It establishes the rules that govern the employee-employer relationship, right? So the rules about hours of work and mandatory break periods and how much you have to pay people and so on and so forth, right? The rules that dictate that relationship, and those are obviously important. So animal welfare. So if you're going to get into a zoo attraction, or we talk about Reptilia, which is across the street from the school there, those would be rules that they'd have to apply to, right? If you look at examples in the local market, you have like something like the Toronto Zoo or the Ripley's Aquarium that have fairly good reputations, and then you have something like Marineland that's been sort of in and out of the news about different things that are going on, and all of that is about how do you fit within those regulations and guidelines, right? About the sort of control and care of animals, and there are certain animals now in Ontario that are banned from being used as in animal shows or in zoos and aquariums and things like that, based on some of it's based on public sentiment, and some of it's just based on sort of, I guess, knowledge that's gained through time that maybe these animals are not really suitable for captivity. Local example where the Toronto Zoo got rid of their elephants, right? And that was part of a large public awareness campaign, right? And they sent them to a sanctuary. I think it's in California, isn't it?
Yeah.
For them to do their thing, but the zoo probably will never bring elephants back, right? Because they weren't suitable for that, and there was too small a space, and it was not healthy for the animals to be there. So
It was cold.
yeah, they're from Africa and India. They're
That's
not
right.
supposed to be. Okay, public pool regulations, same thing. If you're going to open a water park, or if you're going to have a splash pad or something in your facility, then you need to have a fairly good working knowledge of the public pool regulations. And that is going to dictate all kinds of stuff, right? Water quality and clarity, training, safety equipment that you need, how many bathers you can put in the pool. And that I would say that that's on par with the sort of level of complexity of the food and alcohol sales part of it. And usually alcohol and food, food and drink and pool regulations are usually managed by the local municipality. So sometimes you get the same inspector that'll come and do both, but they are fairly heavily inspected. and they have a lot of regulations that are built into them because, you know, those are sort of areas that have a high ratio of potentiality for problems in terms of, you know, sort of waterborne illnesses or drowning and things like that that you need to be able to contend with. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about amusement rides in Ontario. There's a lot of attractions, you know, whether you sort of realize it or not, operate something that would be technically defined as an amusement device. And um, in Ontario, those devices are licensed and sort of regulated by was a body called the TSSA, and they were in the news this year because they had a strike during the CNE, I believe, and so it got a little bit of attention of what they do. But the TSSA, the Technical Standards and Safety Authority, is they're not part of the government. They're kind of an agency that's been given authority by the government to regulate these attractions. And they do a whole bunch of other stuff. They regulate things like pressure vessels and fuels and elevators and escalators. And you'll probably see this logo. If you take in an elevator, you'll see a stamp on it. They do things like ski lifts and you name it, that kind of stuff. But what their job is to register and license attractions. You know, they issue permits, they license operators, they inspect devices, and you know, if there's an incident on one, then they'll conduct those investigations. And they have a public safety sort of wing about them, so they would, you know, their aim is to sort of provide some public outreach about, you know, things you should look for. And if you go to the CNE, there's probably a good example there where they'll have a booth, and you know, they may give some information to parents about, you know, how to you know, have your children ride safely, or things, you know, because they believe in a cooperative approach too, right? That, you know, amusement device safety is not only about how well the ride is maintained and operated, but just the general behavior of the people on the ride. So if you have a whole bunch of people that are standing up on a roller coaster and defeating the purpose of those restraints, then they've obviously put themselves in harm as well. So there's a little bit of back and forth on that, but just looking for issues like that. But so the TSSA, that's basically who they are. So
I was gonna say, they spend a lot of time at the CNE every day making sure that those rides.
they certainly do. All right. So in Ontario, what would be classified as an amusement device? And that's, you know, sometimes it sort of goes from the very easy to define, and you can see the picture there of the Yukon Striker at Canada's Wonderland. So I mean, that's a pretty obvious, you know, you can say, yeah, that's an amusement device, right? So, you know, roller coasters and other hard rides. So, you know, the sort of fixed machines that people get on. So Ferris wheels, carousels, you know, powered amusement devices, right? You can name it pretty much, you know, if you've been to a carnival, a fair, an amusement park, you know, those fit your classic, you know, this is a hard ride of, you know, attraction, right? So, and those are pretty obvious. So any one of those, they would be a licensed, regulated attraction. Okay. But then there's other ones. So what else fits in that? So water slides, flumes, so like log rides, that type of stuff, and dry slides. So certain slides like
The carpet slides.
yeah, there's a certain height limit in which something goes from a playground apparatus like the type that you would see at your local park to something that becomes an amusement ride. And yeah, Chuck's example is about the best one I can give, is that, you know, when you go to the park, you know, here in your neighborhood, there may be a slide that's, you know, attached to a swing set or something, and the TSSA has no regulation over that. They don't oversee them unless you put water in it, and all of a sudden it becomes a water slide. It's kind of weird. But if they pass a certain height threshold, like those carpet slides that you'll see at the CNE, or those sort of, you know, fairs that you see in the parking lots at malls, things like that, then it sort of borders into an amusement device, and it becomes part of them. And if I remember the code right, I think it's something over 3 meters. I believe it becomes an amusement device or something like that, but don't quote me on that. I have to look it up again. I don't operate a lot of slides other than water slide. Go-karts and bumper cars are regulated by the TSSA. So if you go to a go-kart track, anywhere in Ontario, then the TSSA's got jurisdiction over that. So they consider that an amusement device. And so they set out a whole bunch of rules for that in terms of how you must operate it, type of go-kart features, the mandatory use of helmets, and, all those kinds of things.
That looks like Formula Cartways up in just the Yorkdale.
Oh yeah, probably. There's a lot of them. Okay.
Yeah.
This is where the big one, and people that they don't realize are classified as amusement devices in Ontario. Inflatable, right? So bouncy castles and the big sort of inflatable slides and all those different. There's such a variety. I think every time you look in some amusement magazine, there's someone coming up with a new inflatable. They're kind of it's a bit of a booming industry only because they're portable, right? So a lot of people are, they get into the rentals for birthday parties and fairs and things like that. They tend to be the highest incident rates because of how they're operated and what they're made out of. But inflatables are definitely regulated in the province of Ontario. Bouncers, so kind of like that thing on the right there, the trampoline bounce. And anything that involves a bungee, although the TSSA is really adverse to bungee devices in Ontario. So a lot of the rides that are considered bungees aren't bungees because they use steel cables instead of rubberized cables. But there's still a provision that you can do bungee here in Ontario. It's just they really tightly regulate them because of, again, there's a high incident rate with bungee devices because sometimes those bungees tend to fail.
And snap.
So, but those are also included under the act. Right. What do we got next? Zip lines. So zip lines and high ropes courses, things like that are included. So those places like Treetop Adventures and just any generic zip line would be covered and inspected by the TSSA as a special class of amusement device. All right, so how does all this work? Okay, so the Amusement Devices Act of Ontario, which is Regulation 221, sets out the requirements in Ontario for the operation and in construction or erection of amusement devices in Ontario. And so, in short, without giving you the whole bit, but you need to meet certain conditions to hold an amusement device operator's license. So some of that includes how much insurance you carry, the training and qualifications of the staff. Oh, go back to the slide there. We'll kind of go through that. License. No, stay back. There we go. So
Should I go back one more?
No. So this is fine. So yeah, it requires you to meet those conditions. You need to license and register your devices. So they have to have a registration. They need to be inspected annually. And by inspected annually, I mean inspected by the TSSA. Most operators inspect their rides daily. It sets out the training or licensing of the technicians to maintain, repair, and erect them. So, for instance, at Canada's Wonderland, all of the mechanics that work on the rides need to be licensed amusement device mechanics. And that's a training program or a certification that they get through the TSSA. There's reporting of injuries and incidents to the TSSA. So no matter how minor, there's a reporting protocol for it. And then obviously that reporting protocol escalates as the severity of the injury escalates too. So they set out rules about, when you can just send them a report and say, someone got hurt versus, you need to shut down and call an inspector. And it requires you to provide training for your operators and document their training. So you have to have written documentation that your operators have been trained in the safe operation of the ride. Okay, now you can go to the next slide.
All right, I'm on it.
Okay, so what are those requirements that you need to get an operator's license in Ontario? you need a minimum of $2 million in liability per occurrence. So this is even if you're going to operate a bouncy castle. So you need commercial liability insurance. You need to have under contract or employ. So you don't have to have you can hire someone to do your maintenance for you, which is pretty typical in smaller settings. So if you only have one ride at your facility, you may contract that out to a provider who will do that for you. But or if you're a large park, then you're going to hire a maintenance staff to do it in-house, right? So you're going to employ you're going to have to show that you have an employee or a contract with somebody before you can even get your license. You have to have somebody under your employ that has full knowledge of the act. So that sometimes is the director of operations at a park that is basically listed under the license as the responsible person for that park. So they're going to be the one that is responsible for compliance and making sure that everything operates within the act. And of course, you have to pay your fees. So there's licensing fees and things like that. So, but all of that comes part of it. That's a really cool slide, that one there. That's at Calypso.
That is Calypso, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So when you're building a ride, you need to submit information and you have to build what's called the technical dossier. So there's a construction of a picture of a rider and a construction there that I might have built right there at Wet 'n Wild. So when you're
Mike's the guy up in the basket there.
No,
right by the 4 circles.
I believe I'm the guy taking the picture. So. But so part of that process is submission of information, an information package to the TSSA about the ride that you're building. And that package is called the technical dossier. And usually it has to be filled out by a certified engineer. But usually that's information that gets brought from the manufacturer of the ride. So if you're going to buy it from a reputable company, then they're going to submit, you're going to get some information, you're going to put that in the technical package, and they're going to review it to make sure that it complies with the regulations in Ontario as opposed to what type of attractions can be built and what are the rules about them. So you can't just dream up something and say that I'm going to do this, because there are all kinds of rules about what kind of fail safes required and margins of safety. That's where the engineering review at the TSSA happens. So their engineers will review it and make sure that it conforms to recognized design standards. So, and I think we're going to cover that a little later today, but there are bodies that set design and performance standards for amusement devices. So they make sure that it conforms to that. You'll have to supply operation, maintenance, and training documentation. So how are you going to run it? How many people are you going to run it with? How are you going to train them? How are you going to maintain it? And then once the ride is constructed and it's operating, it has to undergo initial and annual inspection. So the initial inspection is pretty rigorous. The annuals are fairly quick, but the initial one would test the ride to make sure that it performs as documented. Looking at the construction, making sure that nothing got missed, all that kind of stuff. And it's fairly extensive. It takes a few days for you to really pass that inspection. And before you've even done that, usually the operator themselves, such as the park, would have put it through quite a bit of stuff. We have our internal processes at Canada's Wonderland about when a new ride goes in and what sort of testing we're going to do on it. We run it a lot before we put people on it, and we test everything to make sure that all of the fail safes that are supposed to work. So in some cases, we're going to purposely put it in situations where it should stop itself, or that it'll shut down, or it will fail, and see where that failure occurs. So fire away.
Oh, look at that. You see?
How did I do? 9 o'clock. Good.
All right. All right.
So any questions so far about that? Stuff that I talked about this morning, we kind of gave you a abbreviated look at it, but in general, I think the the sort of, I'll say the underlying message is that you need to be, you can't just walk into the attractions industry in Ontario without doing a little bit of research first. And usually that comes with conversations with experts and local bodies such as the TSSA or your local public health unit, or building inspectors, or even just, like I said, code consultants, to talk about what are the rules that are going to apply to me in my specific attraction. Some of them may apply, some of them may not. The ones that usually catch people are the use of inflatables. I worked in an establishment that had a whole bunch of inflatables that they used for their children's programs, and none of them were licensed and registered. And that was the first thing I said to them is, well, have these been registered in Ontario? And they were a company that operated across North America, and they had no idea that they had to. And so we had to go through the process of getting all that done and everything. And that's, I think, usually where, if you're, I think it's pretty obvious if you're going to build an amusement park that you're going to be engaging with these people. But when you start to do things that are, I'll say, portable or mobile, or they're smaller, sort of that, I'll say, at that sort of birthday party level operation, that sometimes operators get caught because they don't understand all of the rules and regulations. And you certainly don't want to be in a situation where you're running your business, and let's say your business is Mike's Party Inflatables, and you have a fleet of 50 bouncy castles that you rent out every weekend to do birthday parties in people's backyards, and you're not in compliance with those rules and regulations. That could be pretty damaging to your business, because one, you could get shut down, you could get sued, and because you didn't walk into that with a full awareness of what you were supposed to be doing. And and sometimes that's a pretty honest mistake, that you just didn't know, because the world's not out there to tell you those things. That you need to learn them for yourself sometimes. And anyone can buy an inflatable or a device, and the seller of that's not, because they don't deal just in Ontario, they're not going to ask you whether hey, did you talk to the TSSA about that? They're not going to do that.
No, the sales guys don't care.
So
all right, are we ready for the next one here?
I think so.
All right, let's see.
Unless anybody has any questions or comments or anything.
Yeah, you can write them in the chat. I've got the chat open, so you can also write everything in the chat if you have any comments.
What's this little box again on the screen, Chuck?
What little box? I don't know. Hold on.
Am I the only one seeing this gray box?
Probably not. Let me escape out of it. All right, it's probably because. All right, is
something else open in the window?
Is the gray box gone?
No, I think it's your video. It's probably your camera feed. Yeah.
There we go. I'm stopping the
You're probably sharing the whole screen, including your
I didn't
video
mean to.
window.
I was meaning to do this. Okay, let's try this. Is that working better?
Well, nope, still there.
What the frick? There's nothing else open on my computer.
I have no idea.
Why? Stop. I am stopping the share. Let's see. What else do I have open on this computer? Oh, no. I can't minimize that. All right, well, let's shut that down.
Please stand by while we experience a technical difficulty.
There's a text. Oh, what are you talking about? Stop.
Yeah, it could be the chat box or something that's open.
I swear on my life, the only thing I have open here.
All right, we'll try it again. Let's see what happens.
Okay,
it didn't show up on the last presentation.
Is there anything else there?
Do you really want me to tell you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still there.
don't
What
know.
if you go to full screen view with the PowerPoint, maybe it takes it away. Maybe. I'm
Maybe.
really reaching here.
Did it take it away?
No, it didn't.
How
But
big
you
is
know
this?
what? We're all gonna pretend it's not there for
Well, here,
Jeff.
I'm stopping the share. We're gonna try it again. I'm gonna share the screen. I'm going to share screen 2.
Oh, there we go. You're good.
Crazy. Pissing me off. Strike that. All right.
Oh, you're still
So
recording.
as you can tell, this is the week we're compressing 2 lessons into one. As excellent as we are doing at that. All right.
You have 14-week program, we need to turn it into 12.
So in week 9, which was just about 3 minutes ago, this is what we talked about. So hopefully you're
Still
going to
refresh everybody.
hopefully it's still fresh in your minds and we can move on from it. All right.
Okay. So we're going to talk a little more broadly here. So last week, if you remember way back then, we talked about the regulatory environment in Ontario. So now we're going to look a little more broadly about the industry as a whole and how it supports safety and operational excellence. Because I think, no conversation about attractions and attractions operations can be done without talking about the industry as a whole. And, I think, where we talk about in the comment here that, public perception matters, right? And, if the public deems the activity high risk or poorly regulated, then the entire industry suffers. So, if you have because you're not operating in a vacuum, you're not the only attraction in town or in this, in the province or country or whatever, right? So if there's a bad player out there, or if there's a sort of operation out there that's influencing people's public perceptions of the industry, then it will impact your business as well as an operator. So if I am a public, let's say a water park operator, and there's another water park in town that has numerous issues with safety and cleanliness and just general reputation for things that are other than, let's say, bad service, or just sort of on a service level, but on a sort of more core level, then people will be less inclined to sort of visit your water park because they believe that those issues are the same. So when you take a look at that example of the Thermea Spa in Whitby that had those issues in terms of that, then there are impacts that will roll on to other operators in the province, right? So people will be a little bit more suspicious of it, or you as the operator of a competing spa may have to put out a lot more public outreach to talk about how this could not be possible at your location because you're doing all of these wonderful things to make sure that it doesn't happen. So, the gist of it is that it's easier if everybody is playing by a similar set of rules, and that we're all supporting the industry as a whole to increase its reputation for safety or for cleanliness or for anything like that, right? So while we said it, and we've said this a few times in the class, while that it is a competitive industry and that you are obviously competing with your peers, there is a certain level of cooperation that comes into that because of these issues, and because it makes the industry stronger overall, because you can learn from each other, develop best practices, standardize things. So there are quite a bit of advantages in that. So how does that sort of come about in the industry? Well, there are a number of organizations and associations out there that exists to sort of further those things and to sort of increase the I'll say the viability or the reputation of the industry throughout sort of multiple jurisdictions. So we're going to kind of look at some of those. All right. So for the purposes of this, we kind of group them into a couple different types. So you have one that we've kind of bulked into sort of what standards and internal oversight. So this is where you're developing standards for design and construction, or maybe the inspection and repair of devices, so that you don't end up, with, sort of everybody all over the place building things that don't conform, or that, maybe you have one person who has a lot of expertise in, in sort of certain types of construction or design. And then you have someone else who decides that they just want to go out there and build a roller coaster on their own. And you can imagine that, without that type of experience, that you may have somebody there that cuts corners or doesn't deal with, certain issues that have been sort of developed, or people have learned from, because over time, I'll say that, rides, major rides like roller coasters and things like that are very complicated devices, and they're born out of a lot of design and learnings about, where are failure points, and there are things that you don't even think about, where all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, that could happen, and then somebody else, that probably happened at some point in time a long time ago, and somebody learned a lesson about how to design around that issue, or to make sure that there's fail safes in place. So there needs to be something in place like that. And so that when you're buying from a manufacturer, it's kind of like when you buy a car, right? That, you're not out there at the car dealership, asking them, well, does this car actually, is it safe? Like, you're just looking at it going, I like this car, right? And it's the same thing with amusement rides, right? That, in the background, if you look at automotive engineering or technology, then, there's a lot of standards about, how that vehicle has to perform, right? So that it can't just roll down the road, and, that the brakes aren't going to be sufficient to stop the car, or that the seat belts aren't going to work, or that the bumpers are going to, do their job, and so on and so forth. So it'd be the same in that case. So you're talking about sort of organizations that have formed, or that are formed, to sort of try to solve that problem. The second type of organization would be trade associations. So ones that sort of deal with, sort of, I'll say, connecting the industry to suppliers, vendors, training partners like that, that can sort of go along that. When Chuck, when you were building Glow Zone 360, and you were adding your laser tag attraction into your attraction, you didn't build that laser tag in-house. That was something that you sought out, and you partnered with somebody who was a provider of that.
That is correct. Actually, three different providers. One to actually build the arena, the actual physical arena that we wanted to put in there. One to supply the vests and the software to make them work, and then another person to layer in a whole new type of gameplay, working with the vest and software guys. So it was very cool.
Mm-hmm. And these trade associations would connect you to
That is
vendors.
correct.
Where do you get the the things that you need? Like, when you think about all the stuff that you see in an attraction, and whether it's like the plush animals, or the cool little food trays, or all those different things, where do they come from? And how do you find them? Well, generally it's through these kind of associations that help connect suppliers with operators, I'll say, is probably the best way to say it. That there's a whole sort of industry, or number of industries behind the industry, right, that are supporting that and providing product and supplies and all the different things that you need, or ideas that come into the park. Because a lot of that stuff doesn't get developed in-house. It's stuff that people reach out to and sort of look for, right? And then how do they incorporate that into their operation? So
I am currently wearing my very comfy sweaty sweatshirt that I purchased at Wonderland on Thursday.
well, we appreciate your business.
Well, yeah, but it is, it came in time. It is holiday themed, and somebody somewhere had to source that sucker out and get it in my size and have it on that shelf, or I wouldn't have bought it.
That's right. You have to have a buyer. And Canada's Wonderland is not making their sweaters at Canada's Wonderland. I can guarantee you that. There's no mill in the back where people are making clothing.
Fair enough.
Well, at least I haven't found it. and then there are organizations that are sort of focused on training and development. So they provide resources to attractions to, as it says, to train people, to develop people, to learn skills and to create skill in the industry. And I'll say a lot of that are people that worked in the industry that have built their own sort of, I'll say, businesses where they go around it and they help, like, and we'll talk about some examples of that, but sort of to build the knowledge base. It's kind of like the give them the pickle guy, right? From the last class, where the give them the pickle thing was something built into their business, like at the time, Bob or whatever his name was.
Bob Farrell.
There we go. And Bob turned his give him the pickle into a fairly large, we'll call it training and sort of speaking gig, right? Where he would go around and other companies would get him to talk, and he would sort of teach them about the give them the pickle mentality, right? And how to sort of put it into their business. So, that's basically kind of what I'm talking about there.
If you can ever throughout your career get yourself to a position where you are a sought after speaker, keynote speaker, you're set for life. I'm telling you. That's my end goal, is to have people call me up and say, hey Chuck, we're doing this conference, I need you to come and talk. They charge like $5,000 to $15,000 for an hour. You work once a week and you're golden. I'd like to do that. Let's make that happen.
Well, we're halfway there, right? And right now we're teaching at Durham College. So
it's true. We're cutting our teeth on being able to inspire and motivate. And we're just doing it for pennies on the dollar. Okay.
That's right. You got to start somewhere, right?
That's true. That's true. All right. Next slide. Are we ready for the next slide?
I think so.
All right.
Okay.
This is a long one. We are not following our 5x5.
No, this is definitely, we broke some rules here.
Yeah.
So.
The next slide is talking about the F24 committee, just so you know.
Gotcha. All right. So when we talk about standards and associations that build them, I'll say there are many, but I think the most prevalent and the most prominent one in the amusement devices industry is ASTM International, and it stands for the American Society for Testing and Materials. And the slide here, if I read it to you, it didn't start as that, obviously, but this is an organization that amusement devices isn't their only thing. The ASTM is a very large organization, and they were obviously founded in the United States, but they're quite international now. And they deal with basically establishing performance criteria for all kinds of things in terms of, amusement devices, obviously, as an example, could be metallurgy, it could be, as before, it was railroads, all kinds of things. So they have committees for a billion different things that look in the issue, automotive, you name it, where experts in those industries are put together to develop standards and to make sure that things, someone has to determine how strong something needs to be, or how many bolts need to be put into something. Then this would be the ASTM, somebody in one of their committees that is kind of going over that to produce these things. And typically these are not, they don't create legally binding things, they provide guidance, and then it's up to jurisdictions to determine whether they're going to use them. So ASTM International, they said they have 140 technical standards writing committees, and this is what I talk about, that in these technical standards are going to range across a number of industries, and and they, some of them would get down to like how paints are made and all kinds of stuff like that. But amusement devices are part of the F24 committee, and as I mentioned, it's not law, it has to be adopted by the local code. We talked last week about the TSSA, and the TSSA has adopted the F24 committee's work into the Amusement Devices Act. So what they have is they have something called a code compliance document in the legislation, if you want to be technical about it. But what basically the TSSA has said is that any amusement device licensed in Ontario is going to comply with ASTM F24's design and construction guidelines. And those have all kinds of stuff baked into it.
They change all the time, don't they? As new technologies come in.
They do, and these committees meet rather frequently, and they talk about these things because the technology keeps changing, and the designers or the manufacturers of amusement rides will push those envelopes of design and technology, and sooner or later you get into a piece of technology that didn't exist before. And so then the committee has to talk about that, about how do we make sure that that's regulated and safe. Because an example, in the amusement devices industry would be, years ago, all of a sudden they started getting into these launched type of vehicles, right? So they were using linear induction motors, limbs, or to use basically magnetic currents to launch coasters. And that didn't exist. So, but obviously the manufacturers of those they went to market with these things. And then there's no rule that says you can't. But then someone like the ASTM might get involved and say, okay, well, let's start to break this down and make sure that there's some standardization across the industry about how these things are going to get built and designed and what sort of fail safes need to be in there. You don't have to comply with the ASTM. They're not an agency that enforces rules. They just put out best practices and standards. But what happens is the people buying these devices begin to either have to, by Ontario law, as in our case, or as a matter of doing business, require that the people they buy their product from conform to these standards, because then you have a known standard that you can apply, and that you're getting something that is going to perform at the highest level in the industry. So you're not buying from Bob's Roller Coasters, you're buying from a known reputable manufacturer, and they'll tell you, yes, we comply to the ASTM standard. Okay, so the F24 committee, what do they do? So, all right, so there we go. They meet twice a year. There are, they say about 350 members from around the world, including, I know some of the chief people on the committee are from Ontario themselves, and they are very knowledgeable, and they have a high level of expertise with the design and operation of amusement devices. And so they meet and they discuss all kinds of standards, and they have subcommittees about, they'll have a committee just about like barricades and fencing and you name it. And so what'll happen throughout all of that process is that, and it takes a while. Once these things get this big, they're slow moving machines. So they're not coming up with new standards every day. These are things that get talked about over multiple iterations and years until they all come onto a standard, because there's always about 100 different ways of tackling a problem, right? Especially in engineering. So they want to look at these things and make sure that the language is broad enough that people can come at the solutions in different ways, but at the same time isn't so vague that you're getting different results at the end, right? So they'll publish those standards in an annual book, and these standards will be sort of readily available to all the manufacturers, designers, regulatory bodies, you name it. And that's kind of how they come up with that. So when you think about the next sort of roller coaster or thing that you're on, you can kind of now think about the level of, I'll say, expertise and experience, and I'll say standardization that's come into play to make that ride the way that it is. And you'll begin to see some things, themes or some items that pop up from ride to ride that look very similar, because these are these are design standards that have been put in place through this type of practice. So.
Yeah, and move slow. You got 1,000 members, and you're coming up with regulations that need to be approved by 1,000 members. And so,
Yeah, it's not an easy process. There's
Yeah.
a lot of back and forth, and there's a lot of people that are involved in it. And these are bona fide, like they're engineers, they're operators, they're they're fabricators, they're you name it. They're people that come from all different parts of the industry that are weighing in on this. And it does take quite a bit of time to kind of cover that. But at its heart, this is about providing the highest amount of safety in this industry. If you look at where amusement devices have come in the last few decades, you've gone from in the 80s, a roller coaster that was 100 feet tall was pretty big. Now there are roller coasters that are at 300 and 400 feet tall, and they're moving at speeds that are I always joke at like Canada's Wonderland, if you're familiar with it, we have a ride called the Dragonfire. And it was built when the park opened in 1981, and it was one of Canada's first looping roller coasters. It had 4 inversions. It was kind of billed as the biggest, baddest ride in the park. Now it's almost a kiddie ride. So
Yeah.
people treat it as their first experience with going upside down on a roller coaster. And the Leviathan roller coaster towers over that ride. I don't even know who that is. I'm gonna just put that on. Sorry. Towers over it, right? And that's a change from 40 years ago, right? So 40 years ago, when the public walked in, people were like, do you look at this thing? And they were blown away by it. Now people look at it and they're like, oh, isn't that a cute little ride? So the technology of rides has changed quite substantially. And, these committees have to keep pace with that kind of thing, because there's a pressure in the industry, right, to get, that sort of, higher, taller, faster kind of thing, or bolder thrill, or whatever but you need to make sure you do it in a way that is going to provide for safety. Because if one of these giant roller coasters collapse somewhere, then all of the giant roller coasters would be put on the same lens, right? And would you want to go on them? So, if you're not hearing in the news every day that these things, people are getting hurt, or that they're failing in some massive way. And a lot of that is because of the work that goes on behind the scenes at places like this to make that happen. So
All right, you ready for the video there, Mike?
let's let her rip.
Let me know if the sound isn't working.
Have you ever wondered what makes your favorite amusement ride safe? ASTM International, a leading standards organization, develops safety and performance standards for more than 90 industry sectors, including amusement rides. ASTM's Amusement Rides and Devices Committee include more than 1,000 participants from over 30 countries. They develop safety and performance standards for the amusement ride industry. These technical experts include ride engineers and manufacturers, park owners, regulators, government officials, and consumer advocates. Together, they develop standards that cover the design, manufacture, maintenance, inspection, and operation of amusement rides, water-related rides and devices, and adventure and other special attractions. So the next time you visit your favorite amusement park, you can ride comfortably knowing there's a team of experts developing standards aimed at keeping you safe.
Okay.
I didn't let him finish because I think he was just gonna go on.
Yeah, I think we're good there.
Yeah.
All right. So any questions or comments about that part, about sort of ASTM or any of that sort of type of association or sort of organization?
We can put it in the chat box. Feel free at any point. It's 9:30. You want to take 10 minutes here, Mike?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. So let's come back at 9:40 and we'll start talking trade associations. Hopefully everyone is good with that. I'm going to.
All right. Give us thumbs up in the chat if you're still alive and that you're aware that we're going to be back in 10 minutes. All right.
You back there, Mike?
I am back.
Okay, let me share the screen again. Screen 2. Hopefully I don't mess things up too badly. All right. I think we're good. Can you see it?
All right.
Is it showing the right slide or have I messed it up again?
No, looks good on my end here.
Okay, good.
There's no gray boxes either, so you're really
That is-
knocking it out of the park here, Chuck.
I'm trying to do something anyway. Why is this? Why can't All right, continue on. I'm assuming everyone's back. Give us a thumbs up if you're back.
Or if not,
Okay, there we go. We got three, at least three. Perfect. All right.
well, then I'm going to go with that's everybody. So,
I agree.
okay. So, all right. So the next type of association on our list was trade associations, right? So, there's obvious benefits to having trade associations in any industry, and in the attractions industry is no different, right? So, what are some of the things that a trade association or trade associations do? Well, as I mentioned before, they connect attractions with vendors and suppliers. We don't make our product as Chuck's sweater or anything else. Parks don't typically make their own product, right? They have they do all that kind of stuff. So they give you the opportunity to find new vendors, new suppliers, new ideas, new concepts, right? Things that you can sell in your business that will help improve your bottom line, right? So that new cool idea of the year or whatever, that crazy food item that the C&E sells, all those things, typically you're trying to find people that will supply you with these things, right? Or give you ideas. Education, or like Chuck at Glow Zone, right? Where do you find vendors and suppliers to supply you with the goods that you give at the redemption games and things like that, right? Where did you initially find them?
Yeah, well, we found most of them through IAAPA, which we're going to learn about. That's the biggest one. And then we also use, other people like Attractions Ontario for, helping us spread the word, connecting us with other attractions that we can then, talk to and learn where they're getting their supplies from. If we've seen something we really like, there's a lot of opportunities and options there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's easier than just Googling everything, right? Where do I find, these type of things? Because some of them are novelty or specialty products, right?
Yeah.
Education and training. So they can provide resources, or they provide education and training for members of their association, right? So you get to connect with experts in your field or in those fields that can give you learnings and lessons. Sometimes if you're a smaller operator, it may be helpful to learn from people that have experience, that goes beyond what you do, or that, can give you advice, or, maybe there's other operators out there that are doing things really well. And they want to share that with people. As we mentioned before, it's a competitive industry, but it's also one that likes to share and grow, because the strength overall of the industry is what's important. Because the sort of, all boats rise with the tide is kind of the thing that you can think about. And, so if you can learn from other people and grow that, then, it's kind of a, sometimes that's reciprocated, right? So that, somebody learns something and takes it in a different direction and then can teach somebody else. Sometimes they help in lobbying efforts with governments and regulators. During the COVID sort of situation that was going on, those were sort of valuable pieces, right? In terms of, as an attractions operator, especially if you're, is somebody who isn't a large business, sometimes you need help getting, getting the attention of the government or the people that set regulations, because maybe you want to have a say in that, or because it's going to affect your business, or it's going to, impact the way that you operate in your bottom line, that you want to have a voice in that. And it's not always as easy as calling somebody up, and to get into those sort of, we'll say, the halls of power, so to speak, but to get to the premier's office, or to get to whatever jurisdiction that you're dealing with. So those industries, because they have a collection of businesses or members with them, they have more clout, or in some cases they may be able to hire lobbyists or firms that can sort of speak on their behalf.
Yeah, and a really recent example is there was some change in the public hot tub regulation in Ontario, which was making it so that some attractions and hotel rooms that had had hot tubs in the hotel rooms and such were not going to be able to operate them. And they went to TIO, which is the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario, and collectively through TIO were able to lobby and get that change made to that regulation to exempt certain types of businesses from this rule. And they got it done within like 3 weeks, which is pretty phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. And I remember that. I remember reading about that too. And yeah, if you're just like one operator, that may have been a really hard hill to climb, right? If it was just you being affected by that, but the rules have changed and they don't make sense for your industry, because sometimes, the regulations will change for different things, and they can't expect every variable or every use case. So I ran into that a lot in the water park industry, where the pool regulations would be amended, and the people writing them thought that only people that were running recreational pools, like the ones you see at the rec center, are going to be impacted by it. And they had consulted with that group of people and said, well, we're going to do this. Does that make sense? And they're like, oh yeah, it totally does. But in the water park industry, it didn't at all. And so, without if it was just one operator going to somebody or to the government, they may be less inclined to listen. But in terms of, if you can get a group or a critical mass of people, then you can, you can show the impacts and you can sort of work on those things. But yeah, it definitely does. So trade industries also have an impact on sort of increasing public perception of the industry as a whole. So, sometimes it's just talking about the safety of the industry, or maybe sort of talking about the innovations or, sort of exciting things that are coming out. But it kind of gives a voice to the industry, and, can sort of pool marketing dollars sometimes too, and have campaigns that kind of run across multiple businesses as opposed to just one, or to talk about whether a certain let's say you're a destination for different things. When you talk about destination marketing and things like that, where they get into talking about the strength of the industry as a whole in a particular area, as opposed to just one particular business. And the last is, and it sort of comes with training as well, but it could go into operational things, is share the best practices, right? In terms of, in a number of areas, whether it's safety, technology, training, you name it, any part of the business, there would be, there's learnings, there's things that you can get from other people, to how you can run your attraction in a different way, or or tweak your operation to make it more efficient, or make it more profitable, or make it safer, or all of those things. Because these, everybody out there, no matter what industry you're in, you're always pushing to get better, right? You're always pushing to improve, processes, improve your, productivity, and improve your bottom line, you name it. And, by connecting with people that are in the same industry as you, or doing the same things as you, then you can learn things. And I can probably think of my top of my head, like dozens of times where, we've adopted learnings from other parks or other operations that just seem to be a good fit for us, or just made a whole lot of sense. And so then you would go to those, you could make those connections with those people and talk to them about it, or or maybe they're giving a lecture or a speaking engagement about that, and one day Chuck will be doing that in front of people, saying, here's how this these are
Right.
some of the things that we've done that
Only for $10,000 minimum.
well, yes, I get that then. So, but those are where you get those learnings, right? And so that, and sometimes you will see that ripple across the industry because, certain things will come up in parks that, sort of come in waves, right? So like a certain park will start doing something like, example will be those rider height check wristbands, right? Where, okay, well, nobody was doing it. And all of a sudden, one park, decides, hey, we've got this process. We're going to pre-measure kids, at these stations, and we're going to give them wristbands so they don't have to get checked multiple times and all this other stuff. And then someone else looks at it and goes, that's a really great idea. And then, they talk to them, how do I going to adopt it in my park? And then they do it. And then there's learnings from it, right? What went wrong, what went right, all that stuff. And so it's sort of a, it's helping each other out kind of part of things. So.
And these are just a bunch of the associations. So even our little glow zone, we're members of IAPA, we're members of Attractions Ontario, we're members of the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario, and through that we have a gateway to TIAC, which is the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, and that's on the lobbying side. And I'm sure Wonderland's got even more than that.
Oh, it goes on and on, right? I mean, we just throw a bunch of these up here as examples, but there are so many. And some of them are regional, some of them are international. Something like IAPA obviously is, just in its name here, and it says the Global Association. It's worldwide, right? So there are attractions throughout the world that are members of this association, whereas Attractions Ontario, by definition, is a group of attractions in Ontario. You could have a Toronto association or different things like that. I think my favorite.
There was the Toronto Attractions Council, and there still is actually, and I think there's one in Vaughan too, the Vaughan Attractions Council.
Yeah.
And they just, all the attractions get together and they talk about what's going right, what's going wrong, and how they can collectively help each other out and help themselves out.
I think my favorite on the screen though is the International Laser Tag Association.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think I'm a member of that.
Well,
I think it closed.
I think it did, but I think
2013.
I liked it, so I put it on there because it would be. Come on, to be a member of the International Laser Tag Association.
That'd be pretty cool.
It would be pretty cool. So I think this just gives you kind of a snapshot of just how broad the industry is in terms of the number of associations and groups and all of and a lot of them are fairly reputable large organizations, and then they have their own full-time staff and boards, and IAPA is a big machine, and I think we're going to show a little bit about them, but in terms of what they are, but how they kind of bring the industry together and tie it all together. So when you're thinking about joining the attractions industry, there's other avenues of sort of being part of it, but if you became an operator, then it may be to your advantage to find associations that are affiliated with your particular niche of the industry, or maybe are regional organizations that can assist you in sort of drawing people to your business and helping you navigate the landscape. And we talked about all these rules and regulations before, and these things that how you learn about some of this or how you gain experience from it is joining some of these organizations, and they can help you navigate your way through that, especially if they're local, right? Someone like the Vaughan Attractions Council or whatever, if you became part of that, then you would immediately have access to people that have done the things that you're trying to do, and you'd be able to sort of glean from their experience or get help from them about how did you navigate this sort of minefield of regulation in this city. And to get to become a viable and operating attraction.
I think, yep, you're right. We've got, this is going to talk about IAPA, and you can watch the video, and when you're looking in the actual screen, you can see some of the stuff that they provide to their members.
All right, so yeah, that's IAPA, and I think IAPA, as the video suggests, is a large organization that covers a very wide number of attractions, right? So amusement parks, attractions, zoos, FECs. You pretty much lump it all in there, and they have committees for each one of those different things. And they also host sort of a trade show, which is I would say, is definitely the largest trade show of the industry globally. It just happened. It always happens about mid-November in Orlando at the convention center down there, which is a massive facility. But that is a definitely I'll say in terms of the world leader in terms of support for the attractions industry. And if you had genuine interest in the industry, that's a great place to start in terms of looking at resources and just all of those kinds of things that are going on. Because the trade show it's massive, and there are players from all over the world coming in, from small ride manufacturers and people that sell plush toys all the way to the people that build roller coasters and do all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, Ryan, who, if you watched the video last week from Blue Zone, he was down there for 5 days. It takes just to complete one lap of the trade show floor can take 3 days. Like that's how big it is. And then you spend the last 2 days going to the people that interested you to get more information on what they have.
Yeah, and they have like a lot of classroom learnings.
Oh, yeah,
When I would go to the show, they'd have people from Disney and Universal and other operators, and they would give keynotes and talk about projects that they're working on, or sort of topics that are relevant to the things that I do in the industry. So it could be about safety or design and construction or things like that. So always very good resources there. So okay.
All right, we got a quick thing on the zoo, guys.
We are advocates and defenders. We are champions and friends. We are deep sea divers and river riders. We are scientists and researchers, and so much more. We are the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, 230 strong accredited members who go to work to ensure the conservation of our precious wildlife in their home and in our care. Visit aza.org/join us to find your local accredited aquarium or zoo.
Mm-hmm. I think, what's to be said about that? I think, in terms of accreditation, zoos and animal attractions, it's particularly important for them. And accreditation for them also sets standards for how they're going to operate in terms of how they're going to care for their animals and feed them. And I think, as a personal recommendation, I would say that, if you're going to look for animal attractions, that you're looking for ones that are accredited by the AZA or CAZA, because then that you're dealing with somebody that's held to a very high standard in terms of how they care for their animals. You're not getting a Tiger King-esque kind of thing going on there, where he's feeding them. What was he in the show? It was like they were getting spoiled meat from Walmart or something. It's a tigers. It's terrible, but that's an example of a trade association that also provides accreditation and what's the word I'm looking for? But it makes the zoo a reputable establishment, right? So it gives it a sort of public facing sort of certificate to say that they're following the best of the industry in terms of the state of it, in terms of the standard of care, right? So
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay. Then after that, there are these training and development partners, right? And listed some examples here as well. There are many. And this is a sales pitch for these particular ones. I just put up some of the ones that I sort of deal with in my daily life or have in the past. And you can see there's different ones like Ames International and NARSO that are specifically organizations built around the maintenance and upkeep of attractions. So, they're training mechanics and technicians and people that work behind the scenes on these things. So we like to send our mechanics and especially our supervisor mechanics to NARSO, which is, they have an annual training conference. And so they'll meet with experts to teach them about, new things in the field, or learning, examples of, sort of new products that are out there, new ways of inspection, or even just going over things that are commonly done in the industry, to make sure that, that they're sort of up to speed with that, because you're dealing with specialized niche pieces of equipment, right? That have, that you're not going to see out in the everyday world. So, most of these mechanics are trained as millwrights, and they come into the attractions industry maybe with experience in industrial technology, or in, factory equipment, or mining and things like that. And now you're getting into, roller coasters and Ferris wheels and, all the different things that you can think of. So these are examples. Or, you have Ellison Associates, which is that ENA, and NASCO, which are water park lifeguarding training programs. And I'll say, ENA is probably the largest of those organizations. Most major water parks in North America, and they're pretty global as well. But any of the large players in the water park industry have some affiliation with Ellison Associates, and that's a training program that develops water park specific lifeguarding practices, because there's a recognition that that industry is a little bit different than your pool lifeguarding environment. So it's enhanced training, it's a way that the water park industry itself, and I'd say, in terms of the attractions industry for training, water parks are probably the most cutting edge in terms of what they do, because of the high risk environment that they're in. So they spend a lot of time and effort training their frontline staff, and so there's a look and feel to it. If you go to major water parks all around North America, you'll get a consistent feeling from the way in which they're being supervised by the staff. And that's a lot because they're all using the same training provider. Yeah. And so they act and look pretty close to identical. I mean, there'd be some in-park variations, but by and large, there's not. And, so these organizations exist solely, and they are for-profit businesses, some of these. So, it's not something they do for free, but they are partners with the industry, and they create this level of standardization. And, water parks particularly keen about that, because if you have a whole number of, wave of drownings or aquatic incidents in water parks in, a certain area, then they hit the news, and all of a sudden, maybe parents are less inclined to take their families to a water park in their market, because they're like, I'm not going to that place. Like, people are drowning all the time. So, the industry itself has a vested interest in that kind of thing, right? So, and then we looked at IAAPA and there's the one called International Ride Training, which I kind of call the ENA of ride operators, where it's the same thing. They have sort of standard procedures and training for ride operators, and parks use them as a partner to enhance their level of safety and training.
All right. We can watch an example here.
Yep.
Maybe. Come on. There we go.
Ellison Associates is built on a simple commitment: 0 drownings. Lifeguards in over 750 client facilities in 29 countries around the world live that commitment every day. We live it too. You really don't become the world's leader in aquatic safety by standing still. We're constantly innovating, developing new tools and technologies, but it starts with listening to our client partners first.
We never rest on what we've done in the past, and we feel that ENA is the same way. They are constantly trying to improve their programs, improve their knowledge base.
The Comprehensive Aquatic Risk Management Program is the gold standard in the aquatic industry today. When we say Ellison Associates, the associates are our clients are ENA. Each one committed to elevating the entire aquatics industry. One voice, one goal, 0 drowning.
good mission statement. 2 words.
Mhm. So, and like, as I mentioned, that and he even says in there that it provides, or with their intent, obviously, and like I said, they are a for-profit business, so I'm not trying to pump their tires, but the advantage that they're trying to sell to water park operators, and obviously they're being fairly successful in doing that given the number of their client facilities, is to create a consistent standard that elevates the industry, right? So there is an advantage to being part of this. It's not free or cheap, but it does get you access to the standard of the industry, and so that you're operating within the highest level of that, and you're getting the benefit of not just the sort of expertise of your own facility, but the expertise of hundreds of facilities that are all coming together. And they work with those, and they know with like someone like ENA, they'll have sort of annual symposiums where a lot of the top people from their aquatic facilities that are partners with them kind of all meet together, and they will train and they'll talk and they'll sort of go through the program and make sure that it's developed in a consistent way. So.
Yeah, and sometimes having these certifications can be the difference between being able to get insurance and not being able to get insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Then if you say, well, I'm using these guys who aren't as recognized, the insurance companies will say, well, we won't insure you, or we will insure you, but it's going to cost, your premium is going to be 3 times as much as if you use one of the recognized trainers.
Yeah.
All right. With that, we're almost done.
Look at that. So we're
Okay.
way ahead.
Yeah. So next week we're going to try and tie everything together, and we're going to talking about mitigating risk and liability, bad public relations and media, poor service. We're going to do a couple of case study dissections, and then we're going to give you assignment number 3, which will be due the week after. And then the week after that, I think, is the last class, and hopefully we'll be at Reptilia. So I'm going to stop sharing, and let's see who's got questions about anything we have been talking about, questions about the final assignment, because that was given out last week. So hopefully you've all had a chance to go through the deck and take a look. I'll open up week 9 and 10, so you have all of the information. We're recording this one right now, so when we're done here, it'll convert over, and I will upload this recording on top of last time's recordings, because there was 2 of them last time, and then we're good to go. So next week, if you are okay with it, we will do online again. Are you okay with online? Don't need to do anything publicly now. If you really would like to be in person, just send Mike and or I an email, and we will be in person and or do a hybrid, because hybrid seemed to have worked last time as well. So that could be good.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions? Anything in the chat? Anything you want to go off mute and talk to us about? I don't know. We got through 2 lessons in 2 hours, Mike. I almost need to go back through the recording from last year and see what else we were talking about. I think we went into a little bit more depth.
Yeah, we did. I think, this, you can kind of peel into that. And if you want to learn more about the things that we talked about, certainly, you can sort of approach us, sort of individually if something piqued your interest or something met the, or, something you think that you would want to get into, then, we could certainly talk a little bit more of that. Yeah, Miranda?
For assignment 3, would you be willing to post it in advance just so we can look through it, and if we have any questions, ask for next week?
Yes, I can certainly open that up. I can tell you what it is. It's kind of a fun one. So for assignment number 3, we're going to give you a link to this year's IAAPA conference trade show floor. And it will have all of the operators that were there. And you're going to pick one of the inflatable operators, and you're going to pretend that you purchased it, an inflatable. And then you are going to build a business model on how to make some money on operating an inflatable in Ontario. So,
Yeah.
you'll have to, so a lot of what we just talked about today will play into effect, and a lot of what we'll talk about next week will as well. And well, even the week after, which will be a little bit about some budgeting, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. What I can do is I can probably open up this. There's really no secrets. I'll open up the remainder of the weeks so you can take a look at what we've got going on and go from there. But it was everyone's. I think everyone really enjoyed that one because you got to pick the inflatable you wanted and why you wanted that one, and then figure out how to make money doing it.
Yeah.
What
And then you
people
would talk about some of the things that we talked about here about what are some of the regulatory hurdles that you would face and how you would overcome them.
that's a big part of this assignment. What a lot of people don't recognize that aren't part of this world is there's a lot of money to be made in the attractions world. Even if you bought one inflatable, right, which could cost you anywhere between $2,500 and $60,000, depending on which ones you want to get. If you were to do a business case on how many times you needed to rent it out and at what amount, you'd be surprised how little it takes for you to make a living off of that. As long as you are certified correctly, it's really quite an interesting, because it's, for the most part, there's no cost of goods sold. Right? If you go to Wonderland and you don't buy any food or anything, but you just pay your $100 to go to Wonderland for the day, you're not taking anything. There's no cost of goods sold. It's just the staff time, the electricity, and all that kind of stuff. Same as it is at Glow Zone, right? The only cost of goods sold is a pencil and a piece of paper if you're doing mini golf, and sometimes someone will steal a golf ball, and that's it. Versus a restaurant that is working on maybe 10 points, 10% profit, because everything else is going to food costs, and 50% of it is food costs, and then 40% of it is all of the other stuff, the electricity that everyone, and rent, all the things that everyone else has to deal with. So anyway, so I bet you when you're doing that assignment, you'll go, holy moly, there's good opportunities here. So, all right, any other questions? Sorry, I went down a rabbit hole there. Sometimes. And I've got a bit of a migraine today, so I'm sorry that if you've been looking at me, my eyes are all droopy and everything, but I'm dealing with it. Anyone else?
Okay. Well, certainly you can reach out to us by email if you have any questions, or if you want to, like I said, questions about assignments, things coming up, or if anything that we talked about today sort of piqued your interest and you wanted to know more about it, then I can certainly steer you in the right direction, or give you some resources to look at in terms of that. But yeah.
And I'm going to recommend that if you do want to chat with us, start by texting, because neither one of us really go on to the Durham email very often. So shoot us a text and we can start from there. I've had a couple of you do that, and it's very effective. So thank you. All right.